So just to begin the background of the story of Brahma-Baba, because I think that maybe there would be some who don't know. And so the story is that here was a man who was a self-made man, the son of a village school teacher. And this was around the end of the 19th century, in the late 70s of that era. And as he grew up, he wasn't so keen to continue to study, but he was interested in business. And he passed through various phases and finally became a jewel merchant, in particular a diamond merchant. And his creativity and his artistic expertise was such that the things that he created were valued by the kings and queens of India at that time. India still had many kings and queens, and also by the British Raj. And so he moved in those circles. And yet his life was a very deeply spiritual one, religious, and he would study the Gita from early morning through till 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, meditating, praying, discussing these ideas with a circle of friends who met together for spiritual benefit. And so the background of his life was one of very high values. And the kings he was working with would say to him, "But Dada, God made a mistake. You have such royalty, such dignity, such honesty. He should have made you a king instead of us." But of course, everything is perfect within the sequence of the world drama. And so this is what he became. And further, as he came towards his age of retirement, he began to spend more and more time in silence and solitude. And finally, around 1936, he had a series of visions that were to transform his life. He had a vision, firstly, of the image of God as a being of light, no physical form, no human form, no angelic form, just light. And he deeply meditated on what he had seen and heard, because when he went to his guru and asked the significance, the guru wasn't able to explain. So he knew that he had to understand himself in silence. And he began to gradually understand that what he had seen was the form of that being who is the divine, the supreme. Another vision he had was of the present day modern world going through huge changes, catastrophic changes. But out of all that chaos, the earth settled and was renewed, and a fresh, new, virgin earth began. And on that planet, he saw it was as if stars coming from above. And as those stars reached the earth dimension, they took on a human form. And although they were human, they were somehow more than human. It was as if there was a light that was shining within them, radiating. And when they moved, it was like a dance. When they spoke, it was music. And they didn't need to speak very much. They seemed to communicate with the power of thought. And it seemed as if it was a world of perfect harmony. Humans with humans, humans with animals, humans with nature. Everything was moving in a system of perfect order. And so there was love, there was truth, there was justice, there was peace, there was purity. Everything was quite visible that this was a better world. And he was astounded because he also understood that he was being shown this situation from the old to a new, with the thought that he could be an instrument for this. And he thought to himself, but how can I do this? How is it possible? And he had to reflect further. A third vision he had was that of the form of Vishnu, And normally in India, they would say that Vishnu is the embodiment of God. And yet again, he heard very strange thoughts coming to him. And they weren't from his mind. He knew that it was someone communicating with him. And the words were Tattvam Asmi. You are this, you are he. And again, he needed time. And gradually, through his reflections, he began to understand that, yes, humanity was about to enter a period of transition and things would be renewed. And the power of renewal would come from the divine. And he wondered what role he had to play in all of this. And as he reflected further, he understood that a better world could come about through education, through a change of consciousness. And so it wasn't education at the universities that already existed, and there were plenty of them, but it would be a spiritual university. As he meditated on this and shared those ideas stretched from his family to his friends to many, many others. A little gathering started in which he would chant Om and lead people into silence, and the numbers swelled. And people began to have visions. Some saw him as Krishna, some would have a vision of that form of light, some would see him in the form of a subtle deity, an angel. And people thought, is this a hypnotist? Is this a magician? And he'd had a very high reputation for his high ideals and character earlier. Now people were questioning and challenging and wondering what was going on. And he then had to go away. He decided he needed more time for solitude. He went away to Kashmir to spend time there, and he was away for a few months. And by the time he came back, much to his surprise, the little troop who had been very dedicated in coming had grown. And now there was a larger group there. And the people who had been the ones he put in charge of running that small group now were running a much larger group. And while he'd been away, he had understood that what he had seen was this transformation, and that he needed to give his time, his assets, his energy to help in that creation. And so he'd already told his partner in the jewelry business that he wanted to finish and he didn't want to get into discussion. Whatever his partner thought was his rightful share, he would accept. And it happened with a lot of dignity and grace. And so by the time he came back, he was now free. And the news of the satsang, the gathering, spread far and wide. Many would come. And there came a point when there were reactions to what was going on. And he understood that people wanted to be stable in their old patterns of behavior rather than look at exploration of new ideas and new things. He came to Karachi, but people had had visions of where he was going. And so 350 people followed, and they came to Karachi, and he had to very quickly organize places for them to stay. But he did that all because now he had entered a different awareness, a different consciousness. And his heart has grown. He was always generous and a philanthropist, but now his heart had grown very large, knowing that he had to support and help all of these individuals. And so very quickly homes were set up, a home where 60 young sisters would stay. And that's today become a school, so you can imagine the size. And other homes where brothers would stay, where mothers would stay, and where children would stay. So a variety of different places dotted around the city of Karachi. And as time went on, of course, there was a war going on outside, and the war reached India in the form of the Partition War later. But this group, even though they were scattered living in different homes, this group focused on experimentation of the inner world in a laboratory of their own mind under the teachings that Brahma-Baba was sharing. They would explore what is happening with my mind, what is going on with my awareness, how can I shift the personality traits that I have and be able to transform some of them, things that I've had the whole of my life. Maybe I've had anger, maybe I've had ego, but they were being given the tools, firstly, to explore all of this, secondly, to practice meditation, and thirdly, as a result of the meditation, to see how much change there could be brought about within their own behavior patterns and their own reactions and responses. And so it was quite an amazing experiment. And right from the very beginning, one of the things that he understood from the divine was that he had to help in the establishment of a world not only of peace, but a world of equality, of justice. And he looked around and he saw that the biggest injustice was that of the genders. And he decided to have affirmative action. He didn't call it that, but that's what he did. He decided that it would be women who would be the teachers and the leaders, and they would be able to give the spiritual sustenance that was needed to help people bring about transformation and change in themselves. And it was a revolutionary idea in 1937 to have something like this. Even today, in that state of Sindh, people are not so forward-looking, but this was in Sindh in 1937. And he even went as far as establishing a trust in which there was a group of 8 young women, and he entrusted his fortune. He was a jeweler, he had created his fortune himself, and his family was supportive, and he surrendered all his assets to this group, the foundation. And even today, if somebody has a certain amount of wealth, can you imagine them surrendering it to a group of young women? And in those days, none of those young women even had a bank account, not one of them. And yet there was a guidance that was coming from above, and he had that inner commitment that he had to follow that guidance. He had already understood this, and he trusted it absolutely. And so the surrender happened, and after that he became a trustee, in the sense that nothing is mine, everything belongs to God, and these are the instruments we're going to take care of things. And the journey had started and the organization was born. A lot of time was spent in meditation, and the amazing thing was that here was a community that was predominantly Hindu, but they were surrounded by a majority Muslim community. And the government officials all recognized that these were the children of God. That's how they called them, Allah Log. They were the people of God. And through the troubles that happened during the period of the war and later, they were always given all facilities and all support, and not a single hair of anyone's head was harmed. They were totally non-violent. The only protection they had was their own yoga power. And Baba had told them, that is the most important protection you can have. Just be in silence and God's remembrance, and that power of yoga will support you and keep you safe, which is exactly what happened through that whole period. They continued to stay on in Karachi all the way through till 1950. And on the 5th of May 1950, according to the guidance that Brahma-Baba continued to receive, they all migrated to India. And it was the whole community and their belongings. The authorities were reluctant to see them go because they felt they were a big contribution to society through their prayers and yoga, but they supported them and helped them move. And they moved from Karachi to Oka Harbour in Gujarat, and from there by train to Abu. An advance group had been sent to find a place, and they'd selected a place in the mountains of the Aravalli range in a place called Abu. So they arrived at the bottom of the mountain and moved to the top. And there it was in Bridgekoti, one of the summer palaces of the kings of the area. And it was big enough to house them all. So they were together under one roof, and they had large rooms where they could have their gatherings for spiritual study and meditation. But there were a few challenges. It was after the war, food was scarce, and it was a big family. It was very different climate. In Karachi's sea level, it had always been warm and pleasant, and now they were up in the mountains and it was cold. As the winter came on, it became colder and colder, and they weren't used to the cold. Many got sick, and some decided to leave and go back to their families. And Baba said the doors are open. About 300 continued to stay, and they continued with their practice of meditation, and they started getting invitations from their relatives who had by now come to India and settled there. And within a year or two, then Baba said to them they should go and serve the communities that they had left earlier, their families and so on. And so they scattered to different places in India to serve. And wherever they went, people asked them to continue to stay because they were taking so much benefit. By then, a lot of the teachings had been clarified. The whole subject of knowledge, of yoga, of practical application in life, all of those things were very clear, but also the lives of these people who had been practicing meditation for by now 14 years in Karachi and then here in Abu. They carried within themselves that magnetism and that power. And this was what Brahma-Baba had done. His intention was to create leaders, not to create followers. He would say to them, we are studying Raj Yoga. You are to become the kings, but the king to be the sovereign of the self, not sovereign over others, but to have that mastery over the self and to have that spiritual charisma and authority. And so wherever these, and it was, as you heard earlier, it was women who were the teachers and leaders, and people were amazed. It was something very novel that it should be women who are spiritual teachers. Normally it would be the men who would be the gurus and leaders, and now this was very different. But the power that they had gained through their meditation and the training and the inner discipline that they had learned from Brahma-Baba gave them the courage and the faith to go out and establish centers. They didn't go with that intention. They went with the intention to serve. But wherever they went, people then needed to have more support and sustenance. And so in a very natural way, that was developed. And I first met Brahma-Baba in 1957 in Delhi. And everything was very basic and simple. I was 8 years old. But Baba's powerful personality, radiant, absolutely beautiful, and a loving personality, not just that magnetism, but also the love. It was an image and a feeling that left a deep imprint in my heart. My mother was, of course, by then a Raj Yoga student and practicing all the disciplines. And we came to meet Brahma-Baba because she wanted to know whether she should move to London with family. My father wanted to establish business in London. And Baba was so warm and loving and said, "Of course, child, carry God with you and you'll be safe." And Baba also ensured that she would receive the lessons that he was teaching on a daily basis. So we came to London at the end of 1957 in December. And my earliest memory of London is that every Monday morning she would receive a packet of these teachings, these murlis, and she would study them every single day. She would be up very, very early, 4 o'clock in the morning, to do her meditation. And so the love that Baba had given her and the inspiration that Baba had given her was such that 5,000 miles away, she still wanted to follow that discipline of meditation and so on. And so I know from practical experience how amazing it was to see her do all of this on her own. When you're with a community, with a group, it's different. But when you're alone, it's not so easy. And in India, everything flourished. Things continued to move further and further. Many centers were being established. And the second time I came back to India, when I came back the first time, I wasn't really interested to think about going to learn meditation or meeting Brahma Baba. But the second time I came back, 1966, I did want to go to meet Brahma Baba. And Abu was a tiny village, not even a town. It was a tiny village. The road up the mountain, 18 kilometers, was a dirt track. There was no road. But once you entered the ashram, it was basic, very basic. But there was a power that was there and a peace, tranquility, and love that was a magnetic pull that whoever went inside didn't want to come out. At least I didn't. And I hadn't expected anything like that. And it was just a very, very beautiful experience with Brahma Baba at that time. The love, the foresight. Baba told me I would be a spiritual teacher when I wasn't even a spiritual student at that point. But Baba could see something in me that I hadn't recognized in myself. And very warm and loving, wanting to know about our comfort, our physical needs. Now here is this amazing yogi who was by then 90. And yet he was concerned about the needs of two young people, my brother and myself. But it was time to leave, and I felt as if I'd left heaven on top of the mountain and I'd come down to a very, very different world. But life carried on. I came back again in 1967, the next year. And again, many, many lovely personal experiences with Brahma Baba. But I'll continue the story and come back. And again, very deep connection with Brahma Baba, one of the heart. And back to London, more studies. And then at the end of 1967, I decided I wanted to spend time in India to get to know my roots. And when I did come back, first few months were just being a butterfly, a tourist, enjoying the culture, the things that India has to offer in a very beautiful way. But after a few months, my head felt a bit empty. And so I thought, let me study something. And I went to Dadi Janki in Pune, where my grandmother was staying. And she shared with me very powerful things, which I was now ready to understand. 6 weeks later, I said to her, I'd like to surrender. And she said, you know what that means? And I didn't know exactly, but I knew that I wanted this to be my life full time. And so she said, write a letter to Baba. I did. Next morning, I go to class, and there's a telegram from Baba. And Baba's saying, come and speak to me personally, child. And Daddy was going to go in a couple of weeks, so we went. And now Baba was 92 and still conducting morning class, still able to sit in a semi-lotus posture without any backrest. The only time Baba used a chair was when he was having meals, and his meals lasted 15 minutes, no more than that, because by then Baba's meals were very, very subtle, just a tiny bit of everything. And that was the only time he would sit at a table on a chair. The rest of the time, Baba would sit on the floor, on a cushion, on a semi-lotus posture, and didn't need spectacles at that age. It was amazing, and the power of yoga is useful not only for soul, but also for body. And Baba would engage in very deep exchanges. And Baba told me that, yes, he knew what my future was to be. He had told me so already. And I remembered that scene. And so different experiences again that time, but one particular experience. This time it was summer. The other times I had gone, it had always been the monsoon time. And so there were nobody else from outside the ashram who was there. It was just 30 members who were there in the community taking care of things, and a group of about 8 of us with Dadi Janki would be there. But this time it was summer, and so there were a couple of hundred people who were there who had come to have a week of meditation and study with Brahma-Baba. And so it was a large group at that point. And Brahma-Baba said, come and see me this evening. So Baba would conduct morning class, and then there'd be activities through the day. And in the evening, again, there would be meditation. But after dinner, there would be a night class. And in that night class, it would be much lighter, a little bit of exchange, Baba sharing a few more thoughts. Morning class would be very, very official. Baba's lecture and no interruptions. Evening, Baba would ask questions. Baba would wait for the response. Or sometimes he would say, do you have a question? So very different, but very powerful. And so after the night class, Daddy knew that we'd been invited to go see him. We went to his room, and there's a little courtyard there just outside the room, which today is covered. At that time, it was open to the sky. And because it was warm, the assistant, the sister who was helping Baba with practical things, she pulled his very simple bed out from the room into that courtyard. And the bed was 4 posts, and it was cord. And that had been stretched out between the four poles, and just a thin little mattress on top, so very light, very movable. And Baba was lying down on that with his head in his cupped by his arm, by his hand, and just with the elbow. And everything was sparkling. It was about 10 of us, and we were standing around the bed. And the sheet was sparkling white. Baba's clothes were sparkling. There was a beautiful moonlit sky. Everything was just sparkling. And Baba started giving drishti, the vision of God's remembrance, and sharing that through the eyes. And the first, the second, I must have been the fourth or fifth in line. And when Baba started to give me this drishti, Baba beckoned, and I went the 2 steps closer to his bed. And just beside his pillow, there was a bunch of white jasmine flowers. So Baba picked up those flowers and was handing them to me. And the purpose was not so much the exchange of flowers, but the exchange of the drishti. And everything was sparkling. And Baba's face was sparkling too. And then it felt as if there was a light shining in the forehead. And that light was pulling I, the soul, out of the consciousness of the physical form and the physical world to a different dimension. And it was beyond this world, a world of no sound, a world of silence, a world in which it was as if it was just me and my parent, just that being of light, the supreme. I don't know how long I was held there in that silence, but after a while, it was as if the voltage had reduced and my consciousness came back here, and I realized that I was back in the physical dimension. And it was as if I had taken a new birth. I had gone to another place and now come back, but different. And that was a very, very special moment that I recall so vividly even today. And then after that was night anyway, we parted company, and Baba spent time just talking about very practical issues, about coming and staying in the ashram, many practical details. Baba was an amazing spiritual leader, but Baba was totally aware of the pragmatic side of life and the practical details that needed attention. Baba would take a tour of the kitchen every day and make sure that everything was as it should be. And a handful of people and 200 people who had come, cooking for them, logistics, Baba managed everything. But meanwhile, Baba had also been training many others. And the training was not sit down and learn, but practical example. We would see how Baba would interact with others. We would see how Baba would go through a process of decision making. And so all of those were processes of training. In the Murali, Baba would share his own experiences of meditation, his own understanding of spiritual teachings. So it was very practical training through his own life. I came back again in October, this time ready to go wherever Baba would send me. And Baba sent me with the person who had been living with him for the last several years as the manager of the whole family, the organization. And Didi. We called her Didi Manmoini. So I was to go with her to Delhi and wherever else. And meanwhile, Dadi Prakash Muni was going to be looking after the ashram as the manager with Baba. And so my own sense is that Baba knew it was time to go. And he was preparing. Didi had had 4 years of preparation with Baba. Now it was time for Baba to prepare Dadi Prakash Muni. And of course, she'd spent time with Baba, Karachi and all those days, but in recent times, she'd been more out on the service field rather than in Mount Abu. And so that period became a period of preparation. I was very fortunate I could come back again in December. And each time I was seeing him in that space of 6 months, I saw him 3 times. I was seeing that it was as if Baba's attention was more and more focused on silence. And it was as if Baba was in company with God. And everything that Baba spoke seemed to be not from this level, but from another level. And so even in that space of 6 months, it was as if Baba was detaching himself from the things that were going on, engaged, and yet still detached. A very interesting combination. I came back in December, and again it was a very moving meeting because Baba was pleased that I was happy in this life and very comfortable, and Baba had many ideas to share about service. And I went back to the place where Didi had fixed me, which was Agra. And on the night of the 18th of January, in Agra, we received a telegram that Brahma-Baba has flown away. 19th morning, we left and came to Abu. And we arrived on the morning of the 20th, and there was meditation going on. And we joined the meditation. It had been continuous since the 18th night. And on the 21st, instructions came through a trance messenger. And you'll have to ask about what is trance and what trance messengers are another time. But the message came through Dadi Gulzar that the 21st would be the day of the cremation. And we got permission that the cremation would be in our own land, sacred land. And so the place where there was a badminton games court, that became the cremation place. And something unique happened. Part of the message was that Dadi Prakash Muni had to light the fire. Within the community that Baba and Dadi Prakash Muni came from Sindh, women usually didn't even go to cremations. And certainly throughout the whole of the Hindu community, it would always be tradition that the son or the brother or a male relative, the closest one, would light the fire. But the message was very categorical. Dadi Prakash Muni would light the first flame. Brahma-Baba's biological son was there, and Brahma-Baba's spiritual son, Jagdish Pai, one of the main authors of all our publications, was there. But Baba wanted a woman to light the fire, very unusual. And it was clear that she was to be the next one. So the fire was lit, we all added our little piece, and it's very dramatic seeing the whole body go up in flames. It's a real sense of a departure. Everything got cleaned, all the halls, etc. and the first food was cooked. Through that period, we just had tea and milk and water. It was winter, it was cold, so hot drinks were available all the time. But the first food was cooked, and as is customary when we cook food with the Brahmakumaris, it's first always offered to God. And especially in this context, the first offering was going to be to God, and we would hear further through the trance messenger whatever instructions were given. So we sat in meditation, and there were 700 people there. People had come from all parts of India. The hall could only accommodate at the most about 250. And it was a very, very powerful experience of actually being there. And the trance messenger, Dadi Gulzar, sat to offer the food. And the dadis were in the front line, and the young sisters, the Kumaris, were in the next line. So I was right there. And Dadi Gulzar went into trance. When she came back, well, we thought she'd come back. Her eyes opened. But after a few moments, it really didn't feel that it was Dadi Gulzar. It was actually Shiv Baba who had come, the Supreme. It sounds very strange, but that's how it was. And after giving drishti to the whole gathering, more than half were standing outside in the corridor and in the back courtyard. And the drishti was reaching every individual. About half an hour. And after that, a voice spoke. And it wasn't Dadi Gulzar's voice, it was the whisper that some of you may have heard in the Avyakt Murlis. And when that voice spoke, it carried authority, but it was very soft, very, very soft. And Baba had never used a microphone, but now it needed amplification, and they quickly rigged up the tape recorder to amplify, but of course it was not more effective than just about 100 people in the hall, but everybody was very patient. They were just catching the vibrations. And it was like the Supreme Commander had come to meet his army and to give them a boost. And Baba made them all laugh at first. Baba said, all of you are supposed to be beings of peace, but instead of being the children of the ocean of peace, you've been in an ocean of upheaval. And it was perfect. It released the tension. Everybody laughed. And Shiv Baba went on to explain what would be happening over the next period of time for at least the next 50 years. We didn't know at that time it would be 50 years plus, but it was. And so those instructions are still being followed today. And the legacy was the Murlis, the knowledge that God had explained, the knowledge that Brahma-Baba was following in his life, and the Murlis contained all the knowledge. But Baba explained this was something that we would need to revise because we had heard amazing things, but we hadn't practiced them. And so the very first legacy was the legacy of that truth, the wisdom. And so today we study the Murlis, and I'm still amazed at the things that Baba spoke in the 60s and are still relevant today. When I read them, sometimes I feel as if Baba's actually seeing what's going on at the present moment. And after these Murlis, the second legacy has been what we call the Avyakt Murlis, the subtle Murlis that have come through Dadi Gulzar as a trance medium. The first Murlis, the legacy of knowledge, knowledge of soul, of God, of time, rebirth, karma philosophy, the cycle of the world, the interrelationship of all the religions of the world, gives us an amazing insight into eternal truth. The Avyakt Murlis, the legacy of this is how to develop spiritual power. And the example that's always quoted is that of Brahma-Baba. You saw this man do this, you can do the same. You saw his tolerance, you saw his ability to accommodate, his flexibility, you saw his humility, you saw his tolerance. Now, how did he develop those powers? This is how you can do the same. And the virtues. What is humility? What is patience? What is contentment? You name that virtue. And Baba has explained through the Avyakt Murlis how to be able to imbue those virtues within ourselves. And again, the role model has been Brahma-Baba. And so, apart from the knowledge that is contained within the Sakar Murlis and the Avyakt Murlis, which today are our source of knowledge and truth, the example of Brahma-Baba and how he was a student of God, how he was a yogi who surrendered everything to God, how he developed the power of yoga, how he developed all the other spiritual powers and the capacities that today we need in our lives. This is the legacy that Baba has left us with. The virtues. Today, we don't know how to have patience, how to have humility. We don't know what is meant by sweetness. And Baba explains it to us in the Murlis, but also Baba demonstrated this in his lifetime. What does it mean to be a father? What does it mean to be a child? What does it mean to be a teacher? What does it mean to be a student? Baba has explained all of these things and demonstrated each one of these things. And so the legacy that we have today is of the path that can take us to perfection. As human beings, we would say, well, it's not human to be perfect. To err is human, but human beings achieving perfection, how is that possible? And Brahma-Baba showed us how it was possible to be human, but also to attain perfection. In the midst of all the storms, how to remain calm. In the midst of everyone's attacks, how to remain loving. In the midst of all the chaos and upheaval, how to be able to be very clear and know what is the direction that we need to go in. He taught us not just by the teachings, but through his own practical life and demonstration. And so today I would say, yes, it is possible to change human personality. It is possible to change traits of behavior that you've had since you were born. Baba showed us how and demonstrated us through his own life and transformation. If today we feel that times are challenging, well, Baba's legacy is study the spiritual knowledge, practice the meditation. That is the gift he has left us with, the inheritance that we have today. And when I study all of that and practice all of these things, yes, I know that in the midst of all of this, if I follow in my Father's footsteps, not only will I maintain stability, calm, and peace, but I can be an instrument to help others do that and move forward also. So I feel we've started the subject, but I know there are limitations of time. And so let me stop here. And I know that the Murlis can answer all the questions you possibly may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Jayanti. So I just wanted to say that personally, and I think I speak on behalf of our participants as well, I feel like we've been on a journey, being transported back in time, and we've really gone on this journey. And yet we feel that we could be hearing this for in the next couple of hours, but it feels as though we're still only getting a glimpse of as to what happened during that time. I would just have one question, first of all. Can you give an example of Brahma-Baba about his humility?
Think about this man who was 92 at the time that I'm talking about. And Baba's asking me the question at the point where I'd said I wanted to surrender. Baba said to me, "Child, is it possible to remove sickness from the world?" I was 19, he's 92. I didn't have an answer. I paused, I waited. And Baba said, "Yes, it is." "Is it possible to remove poverty from the world?" And again, Baba said, "Yes, it is." Baba said, "Is it possible to remove hunger from the world?" And again, he said, "Yes, it is." And he said, all of these things are possible, but only through our transformation. When we remove negativity from our lives, ego, anger, greed, attachment, lust, then as we go through that transformation, others will see us and learn from that. Now, he could very easily have just sat me down and said, "Look, you have to deal with ego, anger, lust, etc., etc." But he didn't do that. He put it in a very different way. That was his humility. He knew how to reach the heart, not just the head. He could explain logically this, 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 and this, but no. He knew that in order to change, it doesn't happen through the head or intellectually. It happens when the heart is moved to bring about change. And so just this one little story of how he was able to touch my heart and make me understand that it was my personal transformation that could help others. And so that's one story of his humility. But his humility was amazing.
And another question is, you spoke about Brahma-Baba teaching people to be a leader. How can we be a leader of ourselves?
The clue lies in that expression I was using. He would say to us, "You are Raj yogis, Raja, the sovereign, the master." The other word he used to use was praja. You are not praja yogis, you're not subject yogis. And so if I'm a Raj yogi, it means I have to be a master of myself, the sovereign of myself. And that means I have to learn how to discipline my mind and keep my mind on track. I have to learn how to keep my consciousness on a higher level and not get pulled down by all the distractions of the physical dimension, to be able to see through things through that higher consciousness. And I have to learn how to deal with negative traits that are not useful for me, are damaging for me, but also causing a lot of hurt for others. And so as I practice meditation and yoga, and of course, he was leading us in yoga, he was showing us how it was possible to maintain that continuous link with the divine. That is the power through which I discipline my mind. I'm able to transform my personality traits, my habits. And so I can be a leader for myself. And if I can be a leader for myself, others will take inspiration and I'll be leading by example.
Okay, now we'd like to just take a moment for you to guide us through a meditation for the next 5 minutes, if possible.
Sure. Sitting comfortably, I go within and come to the awareness of the inner being. I, the soul, am a being of peace. I am a being of light. And in this awareness, I connect with the Supreme, the Source, light of love, of truth. And in this connection, I absorb each of these qualities within myself. As I absorb the love, I can feel the barriers being broken. God's love is unconditional, non-judgmental. And as I absorb this pure love, I rise above limits and boundaries and judgment. And my heart can expand. And the love can reach out and include each one of my human family. God's light is a light of truth. As I absorb truth within myself, the illusions of falsehood disappear. I begin to see the reality of eternal truth. And absorbing this, I move towards truth myself. God's light, God's love, God's truth extends far beyond the boundaries of these walls and touches the hearts of the human family. And the darkness goes, and together we enter a world of light. The day begins, filled with justice and truth, peace and love. Om Shanti. Thank you.